Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. Man, do I have a great guest for you guys today. This is the first time we've ever had him on the show. I've tried to get him on the show over the last year or so. This is an important interview. I've got him for 30 minutes. We're going to start right off the bat here with what's probably everybody loves to hear from this guest, Jim Willie, the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, found on goldenjackass.com. And of course, we'll have the links for you in iTunes as well as YouTube or the website wherever you're listening to it. Again, goldenjackass.com, editor of the Hat Trick Letter, Jim Willie. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure being on.
Well, hey, sorry, I have some questions that I wanted to get to, but I think I'm going to do the last question first because it's, of course, what the audience loves from Jim Willie and goldenjackass.com. And I just want to start off with, in a year from now, what predictions do you want people to look back and say, you know what, I remember hearing that guy, that Golden Jackass something, that Jim Willie guy in March of 2018, and here we are in March of 2019, and he nailed it. What calls are you fairly confident about making over the next year?
Oh, I have several. It's not going to be any kind of order of importance. It's just what came out from my head onto the paper.
All right.
The 10-year bond yield will hit 3.5%, threaten to go higher. It's about 2.8 something now. Threaten to go higher and cause serious problems for the U.S. financial markets, in particular the bond market. The reaction will be from exploding government debt beyond 20 trillion right now. The perception that the U.S. government will never pay its debt back. The growing belief that the U.S. government will have to do a debt restructure, which is a default. That's a 2009 forecast of mine. And more. Second, the all-important derivatives, in particular the interest rate derivatives, will begin to break. An accident will occur. And there's an old expression, you'll see, where there's smoke, there's fire. We're going to see a lot of smoke, but it's possible we might have identified where the fire is. And I believe it's going to be from the Exchange Stabilization Fund in their control of the fabricated, fictitious, phony U.S. government bond demand apparatus. Okay. Third, the U.S. government will make public statements to the effect that they will tolerate the Chinese RMB sphere, I call it. This is part of my dual universe forecast. Mm-hmm. The dollar, the king dollar has its sphere. It's something like, who knows, 65, 80% of the global economy and the financial structures. But the Chinese RMB is really growing. And more importantly, they're setting up and establishing the foundations and the platforms. Okay, very important. Tolerance by the U.S. of a secondary global standard is big news because any challenge for the last 20 years has been met with warships, army, and invasions. Next forecast, China will win the right to buy Saudi oil and pay in RMB terms. This will be a critical blow to the petrodollar. The monopoly of oil sales in dollar terms will be broken, and the Chinese will win this partly because of their simple strong influence, but partly because of their Aramco investment. When everybody involved in the investment will know that the Saudis are lying through their teeth on their oil deposits. I think they have 80% less than what they claim. Next forecast, out of Shanghai. The oil, gold, yuan triangle of future contracts will cause a serious problem in the West, and my guess is it will be with drainage of London gold. In other words, I think we're going to have an event in London signaling a gold default. We already have 2 consecutive months of net negative London imports, which means, and I'm sorry, of the London gold balance, which means they're doing imports. They're out of gold. I'm saying they're out of gold in London, and it's going to cause a problem because it's going to get worse. Next forecast. Germany will formally disregard the Russian sanctions. And we're pretty much, I don't know how to say this exactly. There are indications that Germany has already made this decision. They made a big contract with Nord Stream 2, the second big natural gas pipeline from Gazprom in Russia to Germany to feed the German industrial juggernaut, largest industrial base in all of Europe. They did not outsource it like absolute morons, as did the Europeans, Americans, and Canadians. Since when do you give up your legitimate income source and industrial base with a perception of a timeline toward national bankruptcy? Since when? Only if it's part of a global plan. Okay, next forecast. The Russian Rosneft, it's their giant oil company. The Russian Rosneft oil consortium will become a very powerful entity in the geopolitical stage. It will mean a dead OPEC. The Russian Rosneft oil consortium, that's what I call it. They don't give it a name. They just say, well, Rosneft made another deal, like with Iran, like with Venezuela, like with Saudi Arabia. They cut another deal to share oil supply with Russian Rosneft, with an understanding that the Russians will be in charge of the mixture, the removal of contaminants, the handling of viscosity, and the final sale, not in the dollar. Okay, Russian Rosneft is going to be the OPEC killer, but it's also going to be the symbol of the dead petrodollar standard and the new age that we're in. The next forecast. A secondary national banking system will collapse. A leading candidate is Italy. They've had bank runs. They're coming up with clever financing. The European Central Bank has, I believe, said no more with bailouts and money infusions and purchasing of Italian government debt. I think both the Germans and the Euro Central Bank are dumping Italian sovereign debt right now, which leads to the next forecast of a secondary nation suffering a sovereign bond default. Again, the leading nation is Italy. For those who believe, and this included me a year ago, for those who believe that the Italians or the French, for example, can leave the euro as an isolated event and have the euro monetary union, namely the currency, euro currency, having that union continue, that's not a likely or possible event. What I'm trying to say is if any nation leaves the euro has to be redefined. They have to have a new conference and make a new euro. It's like saying the Knights of the Round Table just lost a knight. Well, it's no longer the same Knights in the Round Table. It's a different group. It's not like replacing a minister or a cabinet officer in the United States. You don't just remove one and say, okay, well, now we don't have them anymore. No, the euro currency has its members, and if anyone leaves, the euro is done. Okay, this is very important. So I think we're going to see a sovereign bond default. It might be the United States. All they have to do is to say, we're working an agreement with our creditors. I'm saying the U.S. government spokesman and Treasury Secretary and even Trump might say, we're talking with our creditors and we're working a deal to redefine their debt balances under a large list of agreements. It's called a debt restructure, which is a type of default. But I think they're going to see some secondary nations default first on their sovereign bonds. Leading candidate is Italy. It's just a ridiculous debt situation. Greece might, but I think Greece already did. So it's not like they would meet my criterion for a sovereign bond default. It could be Spain. It could be Portugal. I don't know. Maybe it'll be France.
Things you mentioned in these forecasts, predictions. One of them was with oil with Chinese gold-backed currency.
No, I did not say a gold-backed currency. That was not
gold-backed oil contracts, right?
Yes, oil, gold, yuan triangle of futures contracts.
Okay, that, and then the U.S. dollar, a potential possible debt restructuring. That's, that is a pretty big call right there. That's the death blow almost of the dollar. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, but I don't expect the United States will make any announcement on a debt restructure, because I'll tell you why, and this is very important. The United States never admits the truth. They're the most lying nation, the most fraudulent nation in the modern era. I'm talking about the last century of nations. We have had already a debt restructure that has been going on since 2014, where nations have been using their central banks to dump treasury bonds at a 35% discount in favor, by that I mean receiving their national currency in return. For example, Indonesia might dump $20 billion worth of treasury bonds and take a 35% discount on that and receive their Indonesian currency in return. There are numerous examples of this. They're not publicized, but it constitutes a default. We've already had a default. I do not expect the United States to take the high road. We never do. I have two remaining forecasts. The United States will continue to suffer isolation. It will be the result of endless wars, maybe a new war. It is the result of endless fraud. It is a result of sanctions. It is the result of broken treaties. The United States, under the Obama administration, made an Iran nuclear deal signed by about 10 nations, including those of Europe, and Trump immediately reneged on it. I mean, since when do you have a new administration that reneges on a treaty which was formed and signed by its legitimate officers on the executive branch? The United States does this stuff all the time. We do not honor treaties. We have a list of about 100 treaties we've new treaty. It's just a matter of time before they break it, because they're exceptional nation status. Exceptional what? Exceptionally corrupt. Okay, the last forecast. The trade war is going to blow up in the U.S. face. I'll give you some examples. We're now in the process of levying some tariffs in the steel industry, and China doesn't like it. So they're turning around and they're canceling a wheat deal with the United States, a giant wheat deal with the United States, and they've signed it with Russia. China turned around and canceled a large soybean contract with the United States and signed it with Brazil instead. So our rattling of the trade war sabers has resulted in 2 lost giant trade contracts, and that's just the beginning. Everything the United States has done in the last, I would say 15 years or more, like since 9/11, on the foreign policy front has been a miserable and gigantic failure. Every single foreign policy has turned out to be a failure. Find me one, and I'll kiss your ass.
Where is gold and silver in all of this?
Is that a question or what?
Yeah, I mean, does gold and silver respond positively? I mean, are they going to get revalued by government entities? Will the United States perhaps use this as a solution with some sort of gold-backed dollar, or the Chinese? Where does gold and silver's role in all of this over the next 12 months?
Gold will eventually be seen as a solution because most of the major central banks have been acting as garbage collectors since the Lehman event in 2008. We hear terms like buyer of last resort, which means they're buying toxic bonds with an agenda. So they continue. And the Euro Central Bank is actually more at fault of this than the Fed. The Euro Central Bank has been buying up toxic corporate bonds too. They thought that was a good idea. So the major central banks are going to be in a position here, Daniel, where they're going to have so many debt liabilities, so much toxic bonds, both sovereign and, say, mortgage bonds for the United States. The U.S. Fed has a lot of mortgage bonds, probably more mortgage bonds than they do treasury bonds. Eventually, they're going to see their ratios so miserable that they're going to start buying gold. And Europeans already, this is not in the U.S. news, Europeans already have a significant amount of gold reserves backing the euro. The United States claims to have 8,700 tons or 8,500 tons. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense. That's a big, big, fat lie. If anything, we have approximately 2 tons. I didn't say 2,000 tons. I said 2, TWO, under 10 tons. We have 2 tons in the form of a couple of barrels filled with old coins. Fort Knox, I have this on direct authority. I've got a client named, I call him George of the Comex. He's got a good friend from his Comex days, and this friend has been in charge for several years with the security function at Fort Knox, and they're guarding nerve gas. Fort Knox is nerve gas plus 2 barrels of gold coins. And when Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, had his little dog and pony show a few months ago in Kentucky at Fort Knox, it was one of the biggest farces that I can remember of a government official. Okay, so
like Baghdad Bob.
Pardon me?
It was like Baghdad Bob.
It could be. It's sad, but most everything in the U.S. government regarding information flow, reports on data, it's all a production of bullshit and lies and fraud and nonsense and misleading data. My gosh, the most egregious single line item that I can remember in recent months was the new car prices in the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018. The new car prices were up about 3%. But in the CPI, they just put it down as minus 2%. So we don't have a consumer price inflation problem. Well, they can do anything they want. They just lie through their teeth.
Sure. Who knows what the real numbers are at this point? They've fudged them with hedonics and all this other stuff for so long now.
Yeah, and one of the hedonics, this is funny. One of the hedonics is they don't use arithmetic averages when they have like say 15 different components. They're trying to find let's put some weights in there and let's find the average. How price has gone up? They take the geometric average. I mean, it's the geometric mean. It's ridiculous. Geometric mean is if you have 3 items, you multiply them all together and you take the cube root. Arithmetic is you add them together and you divide by 3. Well, geometric mean is much less sensitive to a single item being huge. So Robert Rubin put that in. He's a little mathematics genius in the Clinton administration. He put in that. That's part of the hedonics. And one of my jokes is, well, price of beef went up, so they're going to substitute Alpo dog food for that. Wheat went up, so they're going to substitute sawdust for that. Yeah. And this is part of the hedonics. Okay, but gold is going to be seen as the solution. Central banks are sitting on a lot of toxic, worthless bonds. What are they going to do to get out of their bind? Are they going to declare bankruptcy? They don't do things like that. They're most likely going to order the central banks load up on gold because it's time to lift the gold price and manage this gold-oil ratio in a sane manner, because if we lift the gold price, we can all get out of the jam we're in, not be insolvent, not declare any bankruptcy, not have any great disruptions to the financial global order. And besides, there's no economic effect from a higher gold price. They could raise the gold price tenfold. I mean to 12,000 something. And there would be zero economic effect. What are you going to see? The whole television industry fold? No. No, you're not going to see that at all. The bicycle industry fold? No, you're not going to see that at all. The grain industry fold? No. The carpentry industry, wood, lumber? No. But when it comes to oil, it's in lots and lots of different sectors. It's even in the fertilizer sector. It's in, you name a sector randomly and it's probably got a significant little oil factor involved. The United States under Greenspan committed a serious violation years ago when we started to see overheated inflation, overheated markets, and we did not raise the interest rate. Instead, we brought in a whole bunch of offloaded risks with derivatives, and Greenspan is on record saying that the offloaded risk onto derivatives has been a very successful part of the financial engineering in the last decade of the 20th century for the United States. And in 2008, he was proved to be a fraud. But he's still revered, he's still knighted by England, he's still referred to as a god, even though he brought us a financial wreckage. Okay, who else? We have the petrodollar fading. We have the king dollar and its reign of terror fading. We have a global rebellion against the dollar. We have numerous non-dollar platforms by China. Many nations are concluding that with QE and the unsterilized hypermonetary inflation behind the U.S. government debt and its monetization, behind the global reserve status for the dollar, QE is undermining it all. The dollar is being ruined, and there's a global rebellion against it, and their answer is gold standard. It's going to come first in the form of trade payment. And we see this oil, gold, yuan triangle emerging out of Shanghai, and its launch date, I think, is the last week of March. It's been pulled back a couple of times. Not exactly clear why there have been delays, but it's not a simple matter. Very complex, and a lot of different things have to be tested and integrated. So we have this challenge to the petrodollar, and it's a good, worthwhile exercise to focus just on China and Russia. About 3 years ago, we had the Holy Grail, $200+ billion multi-year contract, the Chinese and the Russians to trade oil, Chinese as the buyers, Russians as the suppliers, integrated pipelines to be constructed. Well, got news, it's not in the Western press. The entire pipeline has been completed in these 3 years to link Siberia with the Chinese industrial bases. And we're talking about very significant number of kilometers that have been connected. Okay, this is going on. So the Russians are selling China oil. They're accepting RMB, and they're taking a good deal of these RMB currencies and they're buying gold in Shanghai. This is significant because what it's doing is it's establishing oil sales that indirectly are being redeemed in gold. This is undermining the petrodollar. The petrodollar is sale of oil in dollars. The Chinese Holy Grail deal with Russia is for the sale of oil and the usage of Chinese treasury bonds to do the construction of the pipelines. And, you know, we're just seeing the sunset of the dollar, and it's happening in the East. And it's going to grow and grow and spread toward Eastern Europe and then Germany.
The dollar being the most important thing to the United States. It keeps our military, it keeps our deficit spending. How long would it take for the world to transition to another currency? Because the dollar is such a dominant player right now. Even 33, 34 countries actually use the dollar as their sole currency. I just came back from Panama, and there is no Panamanian currency. It's the US dollar. So how long from this transition from what China and Russia are doing, how long do you think their time frame is for a transition to a post-dollar dominated world?
Oh boy, I'm going to give you two answers. And it's going to be intentionally vague because I just don't know.
Fair enough.
I think we have an adjustment period of about 2 or 3 years to establish more firmly the Chinese RMB sphere. They have a problem that the United States does not have. There's not enough Chinese government bonds, not enough government debt securities for China to float around. Of banking systems. Everything's upside down in the West. Banking systems should never use debt as a basis for reserves. Never, never, never. Because once you start having problems with your debt in the bond market, generally speaking, you start having an attack on the fringe of the sovereign government bonds. And then eventually, as time passes, you're going to have a death of the principal bond currency used in the banking systems on a global basis, and that's what the dollar is. The treasury bonds are now backed by $20.5 trillion of debt, expected to go up another $1.5 trillion this year, maybe 1.2. They lie every single year about the amount until 2 or 3 years pass, and then they tell you the truth about 2014. I tell the truth about last year when I'm in the last year. Okay, nations of the world are going to seek a solution because the treasury bonds are now widely regarded as supported by war and derivative machinery because the auctions are beginning to fail, and they're actually quite bold in having auctions. Because the buyers and the investors of U.S. Treasury bonds have been vanishing for 5 years. Why do you think they had QE in 2012? Because we had huge debt to finance, and we didn't see the buyers. So we went to QE to prevent the big banks from going bankrupt. Illiquidity plus insolvency equals bankruptcy. We had insolvent banks, and if we had some failed auctions and started to see, even like, Italian style long-term bond yields, we would have had a default and a national banking system shutdown, failures by all Wall Street banks. You think Lehman was the only bank, the only investment firm in Wall Street that was set to go bankrupt? Goldman Sachs was in the identical situation. So would JP Morgan. So what they did was they bought a bunch of Lehman Brothers mortgage bonds and never paid for them. It strangled them. It's like going to a boardroom meeting, putting a bag over your executive's head or some rival's head at the board meeting, and then he suffocates to death, and you say, well, he died at the board meeting. He has to be replaced. He was murdered. Lehman was killed. And then what did Goldman Sachs do? They forced a failure of AIG. They went in, had government rulings, and they gave Goldman Sachs 100 cents on the dollar, whereas other banks were given 60 or 30 cents on the dollar. It was not just a murder of Lehman, it was a fraud afterwards, because Goldman Sachs controls the Treasury Department. Okay, the world is watching this. The world saw the 700 billion TARP funds stolen. It was to be for credit sources, to continue the economy. And they put a wall there and said none of it will go to Main Street. It all went for preferred stock reimbursement. In other words, the Wall Street bank investors got made whole after their bonds were made whole by Goldman Sachs. Oh my gosh. It's a crime scene. The world's watching. Mm-hmm. And we invade countries like Iraq that were selling oil in euro. We put sanctions on Iran because they got very large bilateral trade barter with China, and they were selling oil to Europe in euros. So we label them a rogue nation. Talk about a ridiculous story of them developing nuclear weapons for attacking Israel. Oh, really? What a stupid story that's swallowed in the West. Okay, so now the United States has reneged on the very important Iran nuclear treaty, and the world is watching. And the world saw the charade of the Trump appearance with red carpets in Saudi Arabia, where they announced huge weapons deals, but look closely, and all those weapons deals were during the Obama administration, and there was nothing new. Now the world is watching that, and they're watching Saudi Arabia struggle with an Aramco IPO sale. It's not going well. They're not going to have any New York or London listings for that stock. It'll be Hong Kong and maybe Shanghai and nothing more. The Saudis are lying about their oil reserves, and the whole world is watching as the principal oil supporter for the dollar is going down the little tubes. Gosh, I got word from a very good source 2 days ago that the Saudis are drilling oil on the border of Yemen and tapping into the Yemen oil reserves, oil deposits. They're stealing Yemen oil. And it's not that hard to do. You drill down a mile or two, and then you have it do like a right angle or a 60-degree angle, and before you know it, you're a couple miles into the other neighbor's property. Called lateral drilling. Not new. Not new at all. So here's something to watch. Watch the Swiss. You know, we all knew back in 2011, gold hit a 1900 peak price. We all saw it, and it started to come down. Simultaneous with coming down, Daniel, was the announcement by the Swiss of a 120 euro peg. There was too much European money seeking asylum, seeking safe haven in Switzerland. It was driving up the Swiss franc currency, causing them big problems. Very little known to the Americans is that the Swiss have a very large export trade. It's got bases in clocks, pharmaceuticals, chocolate, cheese, and much more. It's a very diverse economy the Swiss have. It's not just a banking center with cuckoo clocks. It's got a lot of exports, and they all got put in danger. The point is that what was shown and made visible was the 120 euro peg versus the Swiss franc. What was not shown in there was that it had four sides. The other two were the dollar and gold, and they drove down the gold price. They used dollar swaps amply, and we saw the gold price come down $300 and $400 and stabilize at $1,300, $1,400, way down from the peak. Very little conversation about how that happened, And it's all becoming known in the last couple of years, the Swiss participation in gold suppression. They were the principal agent to do it with help from London and Washington. Now we start to see the same thing happening again. The dollar's in trouble, and the Swiss are being seen, now that they've stopped their 120 peg, they're trying to clean up matters. They bought tens of billions of US stocks, Apple, Amazon, etc. Now they're having trouble getting rid of them to bring out balance. They want to go return to normalcy, and they cannot ever. They crossed the line. They allowed themselves to be whored out. That's W-H-O-R-E, whore, harlot, prostituted. And now they're trying to achieve some sort of balance, and they're not going to be able to do it. So we're seeing now a rise in the Swiss currency and something like a 90% correlation with the gold price. That's not in the Western news.
No.
It's in the hat-trick letter, though. I think that was in the January report. So look to see a jump. What I'm more concerned about, that's very important, the correlation, but I'm also very concerned about, is there like a 2 or 3 or 4 week lead time where, for instance, the Swiss currency might go up 3%, and then a couple of weeks later, gold goes up 3%? That would be very interesting.
Jim, I've only got a few minutes here, and I know everybody would love to probably hear your thoughts on Bitcoin. My audience, if you want to learn more about Jim Willie, and editor of the Hat Trick Letter, go to goldenjackass.com. And if this is your first time hearing him, I'm sure you're fascinated with everything he's had to say. He's been a great guest. And just last question for you, Jim. If you have a few minutes, Bitcoin. Is it a free market solution? Is it a currency? And does it have a role in either helping the world with a fiat currency crisis? Could it be a solution to fiat currencies?
I don't think it's a solution to the fiat currency problem, because the fiat currency problem has debt as its crisis foundation. I do see it as a nice, convenient avenue. It's a great detour. Suppose you want to move $500,000 from here to Brazil, but you don't want the bankers to get in the way. Well, you hire out your 3 Bitcoin little pros, you fill up their Bitcoin accounts, and you move it to Brazil. You might use a couple of destinations in Brazil and then consolidate it on that end. Poof, done. No SWIFT transactions, no tracking, no fees, and no questions from the U.S. government. What are you doing? Is this all terrorist? Is this terrorist funding? Gosh, if they don't like what they see, they call it terrorist. They come up with a bullshit story like they do with Iran. Okay, so clearly in many instances, it's an available avenue, a secondary route for transactions, especially international transactions. That's clear. Okay, but in my opinion, I'm trying to become more of a crypto expert, but I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. I'm just going to continue learning and not worry about the status of crypto expert. I've got a number of experts around me. They feed me information. They help me to interpret things. But I'm struggling to become really knowledgeable about it and blockchain. But what I'm learning is that cryptocurrencies are just another type of alternative to the dollar in the crowd of corrupted fiat currencies. By a fiat currency, I'm saying it has value by fiat, by declaration. Well, so does a Bitcoin have value by its declaration. It's a market-determined value, but if they flood the market with more supply, it's going to change the value that will be determined and declared within that alternative market. So it's kind of like a fiat currency, but it's really not a fiat currency. It's kind of a fiat currency operating within a closed fund environment. That's a decent description, but it's really not adequate either. What is it backed by? We're told electronic work. Okay, well, if it explodes and becomes an international norm, are we going to run out of computer energy Are we going to, oh my gosh, I heard that the transaction verification for Bitcoin was equal to the entire electrical usage for the nation of Denmark. Okay, we're getting to some critical mass points here. Okay, what we're leading to, and this is exciting, is crypto money backed by hard assets, backed by gold, backed by silver, backed by oil, maybe someday backed by diamonds, but I don't know. We see the introduction of the Venezuelan crypto oil currency. This is interesting. I don't trust anything coming out of Venezuela. They have shortages of toilet paper, rice, beans, and condoms right now. They have numerous executives who have pilfered and gutted their national oil industry with foreign accounts. They should be hunted down. I don't trust anything out of Venezuela. Let's see how they do it, and let's see if maybe the Russians are in charge of running the Venezuelan crypto oil currency. That would be interesting, and that would make it more a legitimate crypto money type, because that's a hard asset. I heard that they have a certain amount of money devoted toward their crypto oil currency. They've got a certain amount of barrels of oil set aside and declared as part of that whole system. But unfortunately, they've got the Maduro regime involved. So I'm a little distrustful of it. You know, you could say very simply regarding Venezuela, their entire national oil industry has been taken over by Russia and China. Russia for its operations, China for its debt. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I don't think anything positive is going to happen until they overrun the Maduro regime. They're up for re-election, and now it's going to be a question of who's in charge of the vote counting. Okay, so crypto is exciting. I actually introduced a couple months ago the means for paying for the hat trick letter by means of a crypto, both Bitcoin and Ethereum. Mm-hmm. I don't have dozens and dozens of clients. I got some, and I noticed that since a few came on in Bitcoin payment after it came down, and since crypto has recovered a bit, the crypto account is pretty much where it was. Multiplying by $220 for annual fee times the number of clients. It's right about par value now as per the hat trick letter subscription price. Okay, so, you know, there is some stability. It has ups and downs, but, you know, I did kind of a time average balancing that worked out better than I expected, to tell you the truth. Okay, we are going to see nations object and obstruct the cryptocurrencies. What I'm noticing is that Bitcoin is being, I hate the word attacked, but opposed in a forceful manner by China and India. It seems like we're starting to see a lineup of East versus West. We're starting to see the West subscribe to Bitcoin and the East subscribe to maybe Neo and Ethereum. Does crypto have a future? Well, heck yeah, but crypto money, when it's backed by oil, gold, silver, and maybe diamonds, not so sure about diamonds. Maybe platinum, I don't know, it's hard to say. Let's just stick with oil, gold, silver. That'd be a very good basis for building crypto money, and we're starting to see more and more initial coin offerings for crypto money, meaning gold, oil, silver. That's very encouraging, because honestly, I don't think Bitcoin has a solid foundation. When you say electronic work and verification, that's all fine. It's more like it's very solid on its transaction legitimacy and its structural connections with the blockchain. But as for its basis, unless you got gold, silver, and oil, I just don't think it's very. I don't think it's got integrity. I'm sorry. I think it's got great mechanisms for transfers, and great mechanisms for aligning with blockchain and contracts in Fusion, but not in its basis.
That's very, very great answer. I mean, it's very open and honest, and I really appreciate your time. You've been a great guest. Jim Willie, editor of the Hat Trick Letter. Everybody, go to his website at goldenjackass.com. Jim, I hope this is the first time of many interviews we can do with you in the years ahead. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure being on. Thanks for having me. I hope people go to goldenjackass.com and bounce around and sign up.
Awesome. Hopefully they will.